Welcome to Hoyt's Bowhunting Whitetails. It's November 17th and I've taken a short break from hunting. I'm back at my office getting some work done here, but I pulled off the Stealth Command Pro app photos from all of my cameras from yesterday. So I'm going to show you what I'm seeing and give you some ideas of what I look for when I'm looking at my camera photos, and then also you get an idea of what's on the farm. And then as we head into the reset, I call it the reset, when you go through the lull and you get ready for the second half of the rut, because the second half of the rut can sometimes be really good. So anyway, we're kind of in the reset period now, so I'm going to talk about what I'm seeing and what my plans are. But before I dive into that, I'm going to show you the sweatshirt that Jordan designed. It's a really nice hoodie. It's I'd say it's my favorite hoodie. So if you want to support her work, you can click on the link in the description and go to shopbowhuntingwhitetails.com and check it out. So we're gonna go to break, and when we come back, I'm gonna go through my cameras. Hoyt's Bowhunting Whitetails is brought to you by Redneck Blinds, Code of Silence Apparel, the Hunt Stand app, Whitetail Institute, research equals results, B3 Archery, Muddy Outdoors tree stands, Stealth Cam trail cameras, My Outdoor TV, and Hoyt. I didn't bring you every single photo on all these cameras, because there's times when you have a doe stand in front of a camera for 5 minutes and you get 70 pictures of her, and I'm not going to bring you 70 pictures of one doe standing in front of a camera. So I did clean it up, but I did not leave out a single deer. I'm not saying I never would, but I didn't. So everything you see here is what's on there right now. And I have not held anything back so far this season, any of the deer on the farm. Maybe someday I'll have cause to hold back a buck here or there, but I've been showing you everything that's here. So I'll have some conclusions at the end, the overall take from what was on the cameras, but I'm going to go through them one by one. So let me start with the first one. This spot is what I would call right now on the farm the best activity on the whole place. There's a food plot here that's planted to Whitetail Institute wintergreens and their oats, and the deer seem to really be piling into that. It's the same spot that last year was so productive. There aren't nearly as many bucks on this plot this year as there was last year, and you'll also notice that almost all of my cameras are in fringe areas. I don't have a lot of cameras back in the timber. There's no doubt that there's more deer activity, or there's more daylight movement back in the timber, but I just don't have my cameras in those places. Maybe someday I will. I just kind of like to stay on the fringes, kind of keep things simple. So you'll see, like I said, quite a few does, and then as we go through some of these cameras, you're going to see that the bucks are really harassing the does. The does aren't really coming out full scale yet, at least not on most of my spots. So let's look at the next spot here. This is a Revolver camera just on the other end of that same plot, and I really like these Stealth Cam revolvers. I wouldn't put any other camera in an open area like this, and I'll show you some spots where I've even put them where it's not open, and they've done really well for pulling photos that you otherwise wouldn't get. So this one is skipping around. You can see that this is all chronological order. I've got the photos in the order that they were taken. You can see the camera jumping from zone to zone as it's picking up different deer going past. There's a buck here that I don't really know 100%, but he seems young. So I've kind of crossed that one off the list. There's a couple of shooters that I'll show you throughout the course of this episode, but I don't think this is one of them. So again, lots of activity, a little bit of daylight activity, not a ton, but again, the bucks are really taking over the place. Mostly younger bucks coming out, running the does off, making their life miserable. This camera is set right on the fringe of the timber, pointed at a trail coming out of the woods. And I don't get a lot of photos here. I would have expected to get more daylight photos here though, because this is a pretty thick area. I have not been getting very many daylight photos on this camera, and I haven't been getting, I guess, the quality of bucks that I was hoping for. I mean, it's just picking up a lot of generic deer, a lot of nighttime activity, nothing too exciting here. This is another Revolver camera, another stealth cam Revolver. This spot is interesting because there's about, gosh, I'd say almost 2.5 to 3 acres of standing beans on this end of the farm, and the deer just don't really seem to be eating them. They're eating the sorghum that's on the fringe, some, but they're just not hitting the beans very hard, which is really weird. I don't know if it's something in the variety of beans. I don't remember what I planted. I think it was Stein. But anyway, for some reason, like I said, it's pretty strange that the bucks or the does really aren't hitting this spot much. I got one buck coming across here. I think he could be a potential shooter. I need to look at him a little bit closer. I think he's a stranger. I don't know that I recognize this buck from any other cameras or any, sightings earlier in the year. I do have a stand that I just put up a few days ago right on the edge of this field where kind of a ridge pinches down, a little narrow draw pinches down. So there's a lot of movement through that area. So I may, when the wind is right, see if I can get, a better look at this deer. This camera is on an apple tree. There were, hundreds and hundreds of apples on the ground back in late September, early October. The deer keep coming back through and mopping them up. There hasn't been an apple on this tree for probably a month, but it just shows that they like the soft apples. We've had some really hard freezes. We've had some temperatures in the low 20s and high teens. So these apples are definitely soft, but the deer, like I said, they keep coming back. So it seems like they almost prefer these soft apples to the hard ones. My guess is they'll eat apples anytime they can get them. But the interesting thing here, a couple interesting things. There's some really nice bucks on this camera, but I also want to talk about the Revolver camera in this setting. I mentioned it earlier that they're ideal for putting out into open areas because they'll pick up different zones, and they'll spin and take pictures of deer regardless of which side they pass on. But most people wouldn't put a Revolver camera in a setting like this. They would put a regular stationary camera pointed right at the apple tree. But you'll notice there's quite a few deer that are behind the camera going through the grass that never come out to the apple tree. In fact, there's one buck on there, I'm almost 100% sure that it's our shooter, the deer that I've been hunting all season. He's got a really long G3 on the left side. This is the one that had the forked brows that we picked up way back in late July, early August. He's been living in this long draw where the apple tree is located. So it's not any surprise, I guess, that I should be picking him up. He came through right during the middle of the night, following a doe. The other deer on there, a really nice, clean 10-pointer, a very tempting looking buck. I think I know which deer this is. I think he's a deer that last year we had 2 really nice 3-year-olds on the farm. I think this is one of them. The other one was that one that had all the points. They had like 20 points. I'm pretty sure that he got shot by someone hunting on the neighbors, which is unfortunate for me, because I really wanted to see what that deer would look like in another year or two, because he's the only one on the farm that had any real big potential, any real big upside. But this, I think, is his partner. The two were often together. So if that's the case, he potentially, could be a really good deer in a year or two also. So hopefully he stays and lives a little bit longer. So that wraps up this spot. But again, I think it's really interesting that the deer are hammering apples still. This spot is an open gate that leads from a bedding ridge out into a large picked cornfield. And we've hunted near this one a couple of times, but it's been maybe 2 weeks since we've been there. It's interesting to me, for whatever reason, and I don't know why, I've gotten almost no daylight photos on this camera. The deer, it would seem to make sense that they would be coming through there pretty consistently, heading out into the fields, but Again, this farm is kind of unique, and maybe we can touch on that toward the end, but there's not just a lot of daylight activity in general here. This next spot is a Whitetail Institute Clover plot, just a little small one that I created right on this ridge top. And I've got decent numbers of photos here over the past few weeks, not too much yesterday. There's a bobcat here, and he's been showing up. I think he was on 3 different cameras, or else there's more than one, because just yesterday alone he was on, or a bobcat was on 3 different cameras, so that's kind of interesting. This is another camera location that kind of is a head scratcher. It's located on a bench. It's well far enough away from the buildings and the human activity that the deer shouldn't feel, too vulnerable here. And there's a standing bean plot and corn and another food source that they could get to by going around the corner, going past this tree stand, but they never do it during daylight. But I can count on one hand the number of daylight pictures I've gotten from this camera in the past 2 to 3 weeks. Here's another apple orchard. This was the one that we put the blind in back in July and figured this was going to be a hot spot. And it really wasn't very good early, but it just seems to be getting better and better as we get into the rut. There's a lot of activity here. Seems like there's plenty of does living in this area. They're still eating the apples. There's still apples on the ground. There's a few in the trees still in this area, and there's consistent activity. So this would be a spot to keep in mind as we get into the second part of the rut here. Also, I put a scrape rope on one of the apple trees. If you've got deer moving through these little narrow shooting lanes, it sure is nice to have something that makes them stop for just a second and give you a better shot within bow range, and a mock scrape definitely serves that purpose. This next spot is right on the edge of another clover plot, and I haven't gotten very many photos here this year either, but you will see a buck on here that I would shoot. And this is a big 8-pointer. I think he's at least 6 years old. I think he's been on the farm ever since I bought it back in 2022. He's on this camera, and he's on another one that's not too far away that I'll show you pretty soon here too. And he's a definite shooter. And then you also see the bobcat again. So he's, whether it's the same one or a different one, definitely covering some ground. This camera is on a corn plot not too far away from the one that I talked about just a second ago, where that big 8-pointer was on. And you can see lots of pictures of him here. He's a cool deer. Like I said, he's an older buck. I would definitely shoot this deer. The moment that I saw him coming, I'd be grabbing my bow and snapping the release on the string. He's a good deer. And this is a spot that I've kind of pegged for Jordan because it's pretty easy to hunt. It creates, pretty comfortable shot distances, shooting angles. She's not super experienced, so putting her into a tree where she has to, be sort of creating the shot opportunities on the fly is pretty tough. So the blind hunting is definitely better for her. So I haven't been hunting this spot at all. And I think she's going to be hunting this coming week, and if so, we're definitely going to spend some time here because it'd be good for somebody to get a crack at this buck. I really like this 8-pointer. And again, like I said, he's been here for a long time, so that makes it pretty cool too. There's lots of activity in this little field, but it's almost all at night, which is kind of strange because we haven't been anywhere near it for weeks. And once again, it just shows the lack of urgency of the deer on this farm to do anything during daylight. They traveled in the woods, some for sure, but almost no daytime movement out in the open. This camera is right on the edge of the driveway. There's a bean plot here, maybe an acre and a half in size. Still plenty of beans in there. The deer do use this every single day. Well, they use it every single night. Very little daylight activity here. It's quite a ways away from any timbered area, so they would have to travel some to get to it. But if they were hungry, they would definitely be in there earlier in the evenings. Just not seeing that. This is another camera on a Whitetail Institute wintergreens plot with their oats planted. And you'll see a lot of activity here. The deer really like these spots. I guess it's the greens maybe that they prefer right now. I'm not sure, but there's a lot of deer activity here, almost all at night. And once again, When the does seem to gather for a few minutes, they don't get much peace because the young bucks soon show up and run them off. There is a good looking younger deer here. I don't really know too much about this buck. Again, he's just a younger one that he'd be worth keeping an eye on because, you know, potentially long term he'll be a definite shooter. This is a Revolver camera just up the field from the last one that I showed you. Again, it's the Whitetail Institute wintergreens with their oats. Lots of nighttime activity, does getting harassed nonstop by the bucks. Nothing else really jumps out at me on this one. It's just like I said, it's a really good producer of activity, but it's mostly at night. This is a spot that we call the open gate. I would say if I was going to try to shoot a doe on the farm right now, this is where I'd go. This spot seems to be loaded up with does. You can see they're feeding pretty heavy on, this is that Whitetail Institute Imperial Whitetail Clover was planted in here, and they really seem to prefer that. Once again, I've really seen that pattern here in the past few days or weeks. They really like the greens, and I suspect that'll last until it gets really cold, and then they'll start hitting the corn and the beans harder than what they have been so far. So there's a couple things that I'd pull from the photos from yesterday. My shooter is still around, even though he came by during the middle of the night following a doe, which, you know, that doesn't necessarily mean that he's locked down, but he's still at least around and still on the move. And then I also want to check out this other buck that showed up on that bean field. I want to see if I can figure out which deer that is, because that could be a very nice potential shooter too. We're going to be hunting starting towards the second half of this week, you know, maybe the Thursday time frame. Looks like the weather patterns are going to start to smooth back out. We'll be getting into the second half of the rut at that point, and that can be a really good time as the number of does and estrus starts dropping and the bucks have to work harder to find a hot doe. It's a good time to be out there. And they start moving towards food a little bit more too as we get into that time frame, and we've got plenty of food, so we might start picking up deer from, you know, the area that, you know, starting to get run down and looking for something to eat. Jordan is going to plan to be up to hunt, so that'll be a lot of fun to get her back out again. So keep checking back. We'll bring you all the action from the farm. So I appreciate you joining me. I'll see you right back here again soon for the next episode of Hoyt's Bowhunting Whitetails. And remember to always dream big.